and to commit ourselves to taking control of the future of the American project. This is a moment that we're going to remember for a very long time, for good or ill. A moment that is deciding where our country is headed. And were you able to catch the debate the other day? So you saw one of the things that I have been trying to convey is the way that this country is going to be the day after Donald Trump is president. The day after Donald Trump is president. And it starts out as a happy thought, something that we're looking forward to. Yes. But I'm asking Americans to really think about it. Really think about what America is going to need that first time the sun comes up over this country after Donald Trump has been president. Because we're going to be even more torn apart by politics and even more vulnerable, even more divided and polarized than we are today. And none of the problems that helped get us to this point have taken a vacation during this presidency or the impeachment process or the rest of it. We are still facing an economy that doesn't work for far too many of us, a climate that is getting closer to a horizon of catastrophe each passing day. Those issues will be even more urgent then than they are now. I'm running to be the president who can pick up the pieces in that moment and guide this country forward when we're going to need two things. And don't let anybody tell you got to pick one, because we need both. One thing we're going to need is solutions to those issues, and bold ones, big ones, ambitious ones. They're going to move us past this moment that got us to this point in our politics. And the other thing we're going to need is to come together. I'm running to be a president who can gather the energies of the American people and bring us into a common project. And if we can't do both of those things, none of this works. Now, in order to achieve that, we have to find a way to gather the American people according to values that have been used to divide us. But if we get it right, are going to be the values that unite us and unite us in action to get things done. The one I've been thinking about a lot lately is love of country, patriotism. But not the kind of nationalism that tells some people they don't belong. Or to go back to where they came from when they disagree with the president. That's not real love of country. I'm talking about the love of country that honors the principles that make our country what it is, that looks at the flag and sees it not as something to hug, literally, as the president sometimes does, but to honor. And that means, for example, that when somebody blows the whistle on official misconduct, that is an act of loyalty to the republic for which it stands. It is, man, I'm just going to have to start hollering. It's the kind of love of country that recognizes that our word as a country makes America America, and if we betray our allies, nothing will be able to keep us safe. We must lead with our values if we want our interests to be maintained. I'm talking about that kind of love of country. And you can't love our country if you hate half the people in it. Yeah. The country is made of people. And protecting this country means protecting each other. That's why, for example, it is a matter of national security to see to it that the Second Amendment can never be twisted into an excuse for inaction on keeping us safe from gun violence. And it's why we got to be serious about climate change, because it is the global security challenge of the 21st century and needs to be treated as such. That's protecting our country. That's what it means to honor the idea of national security. And that's a value that can actually unite us and propel us to get something done. Values that ought to be bringing out the best in us are being used as a weapon right now. Faith should be something that brings out the best in us. Now, I'm running to be a president who honors the idea that anyone in office stands for people of every religion and of no religion equally, because that's a bedrock idea of the American Republic. We're going to honor that, and we're also going to let voters who are guided by faith know that they have a choice, so that you never again have to look at the White House. You certainly won't be looking at my White House and wonder, whatever happened to I was hungry and you fed me, I was a stranger and you welcomed. Yeah. We're going to let voters of faith know they have a choice, and faith does not require you to condone, let alone support, what's going on in this White House today. We can do better. Values like freedom that need to be recovered from this capture by one party, to recognize that real freedom is a lot more than just freedom from, freedom of Amazon not to have to pay any federal taxes, for example. That's not the kind of freedom I have in mind. I'm talking about the freedom to live a life of our choosing, the freedom to live well, freedoms that only come if we rally around each other. Now, sometimes that does mean getting government out of the way. For example, getting government out of the business of dictating to women what their reproductive health care choices are. Other times it means insisting the government step up. It's why I believe we must demand a public alternative to deliver health care, because you're not free if you don't have it. And at the same time, out of regard for freedom, we're also putting forward a vision of Medicare for all who want it that allows you to decide whether that public plan is right for you, and if you like a different way, that's fine by us. But this is the kind of presidency you can expect from me. One that honors these values and uses them to bring Americans together. You can also, by the way, expect a presidency where you turn on the TV and look at the White House, your blood pressure goes down a little bit. So a presidency that is committed to undertaking action on the things we need to do something about, from climate to racial justice, which requires that we come together around a Douglas plan, as ambitious as the Marshall Plan to rebuild Europe, but this time investing in dismantling systemic racism in the United States before it drags down the entire American project. And a vision of national service that can unite us with the same kind of bonds and commitment to one another that I formed with people I served with overseas, but without having to go to war in order to get there. That's the idea of creating 1 million paid voluntary service opportunities a year. We need that to bring us together. Now, having painted the picture of what it'll be like the day after the Trump presidency ends one way or the other, let me say a quick word about what it's going to take to get there, because this is important. We got to remember that you see, Democrats, God love us, sometimes overthink the question of strategy and electability a little bit. So it's just important to take a moment and think about our recent history, the last 50 years or so. Every single time we have won, it's been when we put up a candidate from a new generation who hadn't been on the national scene very long and was calling America to its highest values. That's how we win. That's how we win, and this is our chance. So that's what I'm asking for your help today. And even though our gatherings have become a little less intimate as this campaign has grown, I really want this to be a conversation, not just a monologue. So I would love to take up any questions that are on your mind. All right. Go ahead, Fred.
What do you think about modern monetary theory as a way of financing some of these big ideas?
So, my preferred way of financing big ideas is to make sure that whatever we have on the cost side, we match it on the revenue side, then we just do it that way. Call me old-fashioned, but I think we just got to pay for every promise that I make as a candidate. Now, if we find that and I think that for those who don't follow the guts of the latest economic thinking, that there's some thinking that might be able to allow us to create more revenue than we think we've got. If so, great. I'm not going to bank on it. Because what I've noticed about debts and the deficit is Republicans talk about deficits a lot when they're trying to stop us from investing in all kinds of different programs. And then they took control of all the branches of government. And it turned out that when they get to Washington, they don't care. And that means that if my party doesn't start to care, nobody will care. And as somebody who represents a generation that will likely experience these fiscal time bombs going off if we don't do something about it, I think we have a responsibility. Now, the good news is we can deliver big, bold changes without killing the economy. We just got to make sure that we ensure that everybody pays their fair share. And every promise that we make, you're going to see it paid for, and we're going to explain how to do that, because the candidates have a responsibility to make that happen.
I'm a Chicago Public Schools educator, and you're here in our city in a very I think, historic moment when our students are not in classrooms and neither are teachers. My school is unique in that we are pre-K through 12. And we're across 2 buildings, and our pre-K building is very affluent. Our pre-K through 6 building is very affluent, and our high school building where I work is very low income, almost 100% minority. and we don't get Title I funds that we desperately need. Your education plan talks an awful lot about restructuring Title I. How do you plan to address Title I funding and making sure that schools across this country have equitable access to those funds, because right now we don't?
Well, thank you. This is critically important. I know there's a stand happening right now on this. And most countries where there's an area where students are underserved, they get more spending per pupil. This is one of the very few places where in many parts of our country it's actually less. And one of the things we got to do is use Title I and other tools like it to smooth out the extent to which property tax reliance drives inequities among school districts that might be right next to each other. So that's one. Another one has to do with teacher pay, because we know it's one of the biggest drivers of social mobility. So the economist who leads part of our policy team did a body of research. They took years of data from the IRS to compute the answer to this question. How much of a difference does it make in student earnings if you have a great teacher? And the answer for one kindergarten classroom is, per teacher per year, lifetime earnings of all the students, about $300,000.
Wow.
Obviously, this is not reflected in the compensation that's going on. We need to recognize that building up the teaching profession requires an investment. And so a big part of what we want to do through Title I will be targeted toward teacher pay, with a requirement that it be coupled with professional development support, and that it can't just be clawed back by the local district reducing their share, because we have to actually make sure it hits the ground. And we need to make sure that we're supporting curricular innovation that is coming from the ground up. A lot of the innovation is actually being driven by teachers, but we need to make sure that we create an environment that rewards that, and that means making sure that the evaluation and support for a teacher doesn't begin and end with standardized tests, which are also consuming a lot of the time of the people who could be supporting stuff like mental health in the school. First, counselors got sucked more and more into scheduling. Now it's also test administration, and we need way more, not less, going into supporting mental health among students, because right now you're on the front lines of that too, and I'm guessing you haven't been given nearly enough training, and you shouldn't have to be the front line of that anyway. Last step, personnel is policy. I'm saying last, it's actually the first step. This policy will be led by a Secretary of Education who actually believes in public education.
My question has to do with a podcast I listened to recently. It was called Fired Up.
Okay.
It's not about Hooters. It's just New York. You talked about going over with your family. That's not what I asked about. But that's why the teaser for that was.
Oh, jeez.
Hooters. But anyway, we had to do. You talked.
Oh, I know the story
You
you're talking.
talked
Okay.
in the end about something called an intergenerational alliance.
Yes.
And I was excited about this because, as a person who's kind of in a demographic considered older, even though I don't feel that way. They not only underestimate you, it seems like it's a group that people feel okay with stereotyping or thinking, even though of course older people need a tremendous amount of help from society, it doesn't mean that the older people can't help too.
Yes.
And what kind of things they have to offer. And I know your mother and your high school teacher, I think you mentioned they work for you. And I guess I wanted you to say this because, I felt like older people can be very valuable as mentors to younger people, and not just the other way around.
That's right.
And so could you talk, I'd never heard you speak about this.
No, absolutely. Yeah, so the idea of intergenerational relationships and justice between generations is really important, and it flows in all directions. For whatever reason at the debate, they asked the three candidates who were the oldest on the stage that age. And then they asked the second youngest, and then they went to commercial. But one of the things I actually wanted to mention is that there is such a thing as age bigotry, too. And we're at a moment where a lot of older Americans, more than anything, want to be able to contribute. It's not just wanting to be able to be treated well, it's wanting to, and I think everyone has that instinct. So part of what we want to do with national service is create an intergenerational core where when young people are enlisted in a service year, we also link that up with people from different generations to make sure that everybody is able to contribute. Another thing that's important is ensuring that, not just in the spirit of volunteerism, but the spirit of just good public policy, that we're taking note of the way that this hits different generations differently. The potential of things like automation, which is being held up right now as a threat, and in some ways it is, could actually be enormously liberating for older generations too, if we make sure that it's delivered in the right way. And maybe the thing that most excites me about this idea of an intergenerational alliance is the way that it's changing the answer on a lot of major political concerns. I'm thinking about the debate on guns. I'm thinking about climate. It's not young people marching against their parents the way it was when my parents were students. It's young people marching literally for their lives. And I see their grandparents and their parents at their side cheering them on.
Yeah.
That is where the power of this movement is, and it's something we want to build up as part of this campaign too. Yes, in the back.
You've asked us to think about the first day after you become president. I'm looking forward to that day. When I think about that day, I think of what's very likely to be a Republican Senate led by still Mitch McConnell with the filibuster still in place. My question is, what's plan A dealing with that, and what's plan B?
Okay, so I'll start with Plan B. Plan B is founded on the fact that even though Democrats have
No?
There we go.
matter of aim.
Beatbox now.
So even though Democrats have been in a kind of defensive crowd for a long time, the fact is people are with us on these issues. Part of my campaign is about engaging a new American majority on getting these things done. From higher wages to paid family leave to immigration reform, even stuff where we've been on defense like guns. Right now, the majority of the American people are with us, even in red states. I mean, look at something like guns, right? Background checks. Even a majority of Republicans and gun owners want us to do that, and the Senate's still blocking it. And so, to me, the best use of the big blue and white airplane that comes with the White House is to fly it right into the hometown of a member of the Senate or the House who is getting in the way of good policies that are not just good but popular. This is why even This is why even when they controlled the entire all branches of government, they still couldn't get rid of the Affordable Care Act because people realized what it meant in their lives, and they wouldn't let them. And a big part of presidential leadership in terms of driving an agenda is being willing to remind voters of the daylight between them and their elected leaders when that's starting to happen. So that's Plan A. Plan B. Plan A, my preferred course of action, is as a nominee with coattails to see to it that Mitch McConnell's no longer in the majority.
Thank you for coming to my neighborhood. This is America. I wish you were here in the summertime. If you took a walk from here on a Saturday afternoon or a Sunday afternoon a couple miles north along the lake, you would see people from dozens of countries enjoying the weekend in kind of the backyard of Chicago, and these people are making this city and this country work. How can we get back to a place where we appreciate what immigrants bring to our country?
Look, I think about it from a South Bend perspective. So our city lost about 30,000 people after the factories closed. So the president says we're full. We're not full. Matter of fact, I got to pay to maintain 30,000 people extra worth of fire stations and pipes and lane miles of road. I could use 30,000 more taxpayers to help do it. So that's what I see when immigration is an opportunity. I see the Iraqi refugee who showed up in South Bend with his family, brilliant guy, engineer. His life was in danger because he took a chance and worked with U.S. troops. And now he's making our city a better place. I'm thinking about my dad, who came to this country because of the educational opportunities, chose to become an American, and went on to shape thousands of lives as a professor. And then I think about the Syrian and Pakistani doctors who took care of my dad when he was dying and made our family's life better. And this is the lifeblood of this country. And this country is made up of the First Nations, people who were brought here in chains, and immigrants. And we have to recognize that the future growth of this nation depends on immigration. Good news is people get it in unlikely places. That same phenomenon you were describing near here, I saw it in Storm Lake, Iowa. This is not a progressive, liberal part of the country. Went there for their 4th of July parade. They have a parade of nations with 24 countries represented. And it's people working in the factories and in the agricultural sector there. Their economy wouldn't function without it. And so we have an opportunity not just to tell the aspirational story about what immigration means, but also connect it up for rural communities and even industrial communities like mine that need a population growth strategy just as much as we need a job growth strategy. And people are more ready for that story than you would think. We just got to make sure we celebrate it and back that up with a policy on questions from honoring the right to asylum to ensuring that we have a pathway to citizenship for folks who are here that honors the principle that immigration is not a gift to the immigrant. It is a benefit to the United States of America and the way to
I have a question for you. I am probably the only identified Republican in the room.
You might not be. Any Republicans in the House? All right.
I so want you to be the nominee that I can vote for. How can you, as a very moderate, exceptional Democrat, win in your party with the influences you have on the left? What is your plan to bring the rest of your party to where I, as a Republican, am already on board?
Right. Well, first of all, welcome aboard. We're glad you're here. And without making too many assumptions about what's guided you to be here, I would say that I don't think that attracting Republican support has to be about pretending anything we're not.
No.
We don't have to water down our values, but we do need to make sure we're not pushing people away. And it's one of the reasons why I am being careful in the process. But I'm also going to be a little careful with some of these purity tests that come along that define things to where it's harder and harder to hold that American majority I was talking about together. Not just because of the politics of it, but as a governing strategy. Because I want to get this stuff done. I've seen so many issues that I care about that people in Washington have said the right thing. And all of the plans, their effect is just multiplied by 0 because nothing happened. I want to build that majority to actually get these things done. And you and I aren't going to agree on everything, and that's okay, right? The important thing is that we know that this presidency cannot continue, that we need a different kind of leadership. And even if our values are different in some regards, I hope that by showing that I come to my views based on values, that you know that we got there, we came by it honestly, right? And in that good faith lies the opportunity to get people across. Now, I think your question is about winning the Democratic primary. Right. So first of all, one thing about Democrats is we really want to win. Really want to win. The second thing, and I'm going to make this clear whenever I'm being challenged by somebody further left than me, is the stuff I'm talking about is not small ball stuff, okay? What I'm proposing we do to healthcare is the biggest reform to happen to healthcare since Medicare itself was invented. It's just that I think there's a way to do it without commanding everybody to adopt that plan whether they want to or not. What I'm proposing we do with immigration will be the most significant immigration reform since the 80s. And we can do that without going so far that we play into this idea that either you're for kids in cages or you're for open borders, which isn't true. And on issue after issue, what we're proposing is plenty big, and it speaks to the values that unite my party. It's just that I don't think those values have to exclude at least a good chunk of people who might cross over from the other side. And thank you again for this.
So, following up on that, let's take it from the other perspective. I have a 27-year-old daughter who last election voted for Bernie Sanders in the Democratic primaries, and this time is firmly still in Bernie's camp because the one issue that concerns her more than any other is climate change.
Yep.
Now, in the United States, we have a value, a myth, or whatever, of total free market capitalism. Mm-hmm. And when the Berlin Wall fell, it was a justification of free market capitalism. And as a result, companies could go wherever they need to go. Corporations could focus solely on shareholder value, and yeah, maybe some move to China, lower labor costs, and as a result, they reduce their carbon footprint in the U.S. But guess what? In China, it's less environmentally concerned, and the carbon footprint actually increased for the world. And she views very much climate change as a world problem, it can't be a country by country problem. So how do you take the United States, who has a strong incentive for free market capitalism, and by the way, when they move production to China, they also then put on the open seas the ships, and that's in no country's carbon footprint. That's out there raising carbon everywhere, and it's on nobody's balance sheet. So how do we address climate change, and how do we convince the youth who are rightly concerned that it's the most primary battle for us right now? How do we convince them that to go with you? And how do we convince America that we're going to have to make some fundamental changes to attack climate change?
Look, the clock is running out on climate change, and we're past the point where we even have the luxury of debating whether it's real. The best scientific estimates give us till about 2030 to make major changes, or by 2050 we are in huge trouble. I'm planning to be around to be held accountable in 2050 for whether we hit our goals or not, starting in 2020. And so, first of all, that I'm very invested in this personally. Secondly, that we do have to put it on the balance sheet. That's why we need a carbon tax. Now, the way I would do it is a carbon tax and dividend, because the point is not to take the money out of the economy, which is why I would rebate it out in full to the American people on a progressive formula so that most people are made better than whole. Because it's not about taking money away from people, it's about making sure the prices, all the signals in the market, actually reflect the true cost of what is happening, because we're either going to pay now or we're going to pay a hell of a lot more later, and we need to reflect that through policy. It's why we need the kind of research in renewable energy and carbon capture that is going to help us move forward. The other thing I would tell her or anybody who's concerned about this is I'm pretty sure that each of my competitors has a plan like mine to get us carbon neutral by 2050. And we could argue over who's got the best technical specifications. It's mine, of course, but it's not going to come down to that. It's going to come down to which plan actually gets done. And the key to my plan isn't just the year in which I say we get the grid doubled on renewables and the year in which I think light transportation can be decarbonized followed all the way to 2050. It's the principle that we're going to enlist all of the energies of the American people in dealing with this. America always does better when we have a national project. And here we have a national project available to us that doesn't involve fighting other people, which is great. and it's got to get done. It, by the way, is also the key to restoring U.S. credibility abroad before it's too late, because we can't fix it alone, and the world can't fix it without us. Which means that it's actually an opportunity for the U.S. whose reputation is hanging by a thread.
That's true.
To rally the world on something that's needed. And by the way, if there was such a thing as climate diplomacy that mattered, then it would be a good way to be back on the front foot dealing with a country like China. So there's every reason to do this. But one of the things you'll see in my plan, for example, is it enlists rural America to be a huge part of the solution. A farm can actually take carbon out of the atmosphere. The soil management potential, cover crops, these kinds of things could be carbon negative. And the quest to do that could be as big a symbol of defeating climate change as a solar car. But we got to signal to rural America that we need them to be part of the solution. And by the way, put some money behind that instead of just clubbing them over the head. Otherwise, we shouldn't be surprised, as a matter of basic human psychology, that a bunch of people being told they're part of the problem are kind of resistant to climate science and the policy that it entails. So it's not just about having a good idea, it's about how we get everybody or enough people on board to actually do something about it. That's the difference with my plan, and that's the difference with my style of leadership. Just one more? All right. Okay.
Can you talk a little bit more about restoring credibility in the world? You mentioned climate change as being an area. Are there other ways that you would go about finding a better home?
Yeah. Look, this is urgent. This is one of the top things the next president's going to have to do is restore the credibility of the United States. You look at what's going on this week, last week. I got to tell you, having served with Afghans, I'm not even talking about the soldiers, but just janitors who worked on the base, whose families were more likely to be kidnapped just because they worked with U.S. forces. If I were over there this week, I would have a really hard time looking them in the eye. And to think of what we've done that's betraying our Kurdish allies who were the tip of the spear in the fight against ISIS. That isn't just a disaster in northern Syria. It is a disaster everywhere in the world. And it could actually lead to more endless wars because it makes it that much harder for us to engage allies to keep the peace. These are the things that are on the line. You see the UN General Assembly? It wasn't so much the president that was disturbing. He looked kind of tranquilized and he read his speech. It was the faces of the world leaders looking at the United States president with a mixture of indulgence and pity. And as an American, as somebody who cares about this country, I never again want to see world leaders look at the U.S. president.
Yeah.
So what's going to be required of us is, first of all, to make clear once again that this is a country that keeps its word, and that our allies know it, and that our enemies know it, and we got to back that up. Secondly is to lead on things like climate, on issues of world concern. And the third, and I think the most promising of all, is it remains the case that in our best moments, America is kept safe by the fact that our values, the values that we defend, are universal values too. And at our best, we stand for human rights, we stand for democracy, we stand for things that are associated with America but felt by the entire world. And if we're authentically walking the walk, that is our edge. That is the thing that keeps us safe. And we need a president who can give voice to that, especially when our allies are starting to wander off in the wrong direction, as well as with respect to our adversaries. So just before yielding the mic, I want to thank you again for being part of this. And I want to stress that running for office is an act of hope. Helping somebody run for office is an act of hope. And more than anything else, I'm depending on you to reach out in your networks. Speak to people who maybe aren't sure whether it's even worth bothering to be involved in politics because of everything we're up against. And let them know why you have the hope and why you have the commitment to be part of this, and spread that sense, because that's what it's going to take. And I look to you to spread that kind of hope.
And another huge round of applause for Mayor Dean. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
On behalf of the host committee, thank you so much for coming to Chicago. My name is